What if the key to better practice wasn't actually to set more of it or to do more of it, but actually to understand what stops us from doing it in the first place? Today we are joined by Tessa Smith Whicker, a voice educator who opens up about her master's research and how it completely reshaped the ideas she had about practice. From breaking down barriers and asking more targeted questions, to finding variability and accepting practice. This is a conversation that reminds us that practice isn't punishment, but rather permission to explore. Want to know how to get singers on board with their own private practice? How we can actually offer a practice task without it sounding daunting or boring? And how we can help the singer to actually reflect on their progress through practice? Well, stick around. Tessa Smith Whicker is coming right up. Congratulations, Tessa, on graduating from your MA last year. Once that was all done, what was like the first thing you did? Because I can imagine a lot of time freed up for you.
Yeah, I think I rested for quite a while. It's a funny one. It feels like such a long time ago because we graduated in the July, but the deadline for our thesis was back in October, November time. So it took a long time to be like, oh, okay, that's finished. Great. And then we had the graduation party, which just reminded everybody that we'd done this thing and we went and got our pieces of paper. And then it was kind of right. Well, what's next? Do I have to keep researching? What do I do? Yeah, it was a relief, I think, just to have some time off.
If I saw that study slot and I was like, I'm usually working on this MA between like 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., I'd be like, I'm going to have a bath.
Yeah.
Slap bang in the middle of the day. Why
Well, it
not?
was one of those weird things because the course, it was quite a long course. We started during the pandemic. This was an online course. And I'd sort of said, oh, do I have time to do a master's? And my mum had said, well, you're not gigging now, so you've got all this time. And then, of course, everything opened up as we were studying. And I was like, I don't have any time. What am I doing? Why have I done this? So, yeah, I don't know where the time disappears after that. When you have those moments of, how did I even fit that in? I don't know how that worked because I can't imagine it now.
And have you continued to research? Did you catch the bug on that on the course?
Yes and no. I have definitely continued learning and I listen to a lot of podcasts and I do occasionally read academic papers. I've never been a big reader and I really love engaging in conversation with people about things. So I've gone and I published one of my pieces got published from one of the modules of the masters. I have been slowly working on the others, but more than that, I've just sort of been talking to people about the research in hopefully an accessible way and just trying to get people to sort of engage in the conversation and talk about what my research was in.
And thankfully, you've agreed to come and chat with us today about your research and the things that you found out and how you've applied it to your own teaching. So, a little question that I have for you is looking back across your life so far, and when you have been in moments of learning, what stands out as a time when you felt yourself struggling with forms of practice? And what did you initially believe practice to be?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think when I look back at sort of the more structured lessons that I've had, so I started singing lessons in high school, and then I went to university for my undergrad, where I did a jazz studies degree. And basically, most of that, I think I struggled with practice. I think I just always thought that you had to practice. That was the thing, isn't it? Oh, you must go practice, you go practice. And I don't know if I really knew what that meant, but I certainly didn't think I was very good at it. And I would find that I was very unfocused. I mean, I don't think I knew that at the time, but looking back, I think I was very unfocused. I used to learn piano as well, but I was just my practice, I think I was just practicing mistakes more than anything else. I'd get very distracted. And I'd think because I had lots of friends who, played instruments and they'd be like, practice it. They'd practice room for 4 or 5 hours. And I'd be like, oh, I don't do enough practice. I don't do enough practice. So I used to think that it would have to be hours, but I don't think it was ever very efficient or effective. So not all of my research was on practice, but I did do a research module on practice. And during that module, I got diagnosed with ADHD, which was fascinating because a big part of it was like what motivates people to practice. What are the barriers for people when they come across like problems with practice? And I was like, well, ADHD, that's a big one. Maybe that's why I was like all over the place and I couldn't focus. So yeah, I think in answer to your question, I don't think I've ever been very good at practice until relatively recently.
And have you found that you now have a whole new routine around it, or not necessarily routine, but approach to how you then do the practice for you?
Yeah, I think routine is sometimes a word that makes me go, because sometimes I'm like, I love routine. I need routine. I want a to-do list with every minute like scheduled out. And sometimes my brain just goes, no, that sounds like the worst thing in the world ever. I think the biggest thing that impacted me after that diagnosis and within the research and with everything that's gone after is now I understand myself and I just have a lot more compassion. And I think that's really important. I think that's the most important thing because when I go back to those times where I was like, oh, I'm not practicing enough, or, my teacher said I haven't practiced enough, or this practice obviously wasn't working, I would then just feel really guilty about it. And I'd feel really ashamed. Oh, why can't I do this? Why can my friend spend 6 hours in a practice room and I can't? I can't make myself do that. And now it's a case of I have that self-compassion of going, okay, right, today you're not feeling like doing that really focused, nitty-gritty kind of practice. That's cool. Let's do this thing that I know will be helpful, but that also is more fun. And I think working with yourself and the emotions that you have, that is a big thing that I learned, one, through that diagnosis, two, through that support that I had during my master's. And now it's something that I really try and take for my students as well, is that I hope to never be that teacher who goes, well, you didn't practice, you need to do more practice. And instead be the teacher that says, okay, well, what is it about this practice that you didn't engage with? What is it about this week that made you feel like you couldn't practice? Because oftentimes, and I think we all know this, we'll say, oh, I don't have time to practice. We do have time to practice. We just didn't have something that felt like it was the right circumstance. And I think that a big part of all of this is to know more about yourself and work with yourself instead of just constantly kind of battering up against things that you don't enjoy or can't do very well or whatever it is.
Can we talk a little bit more about those barriers? Because we had Dr. Molly Gebrian on the podcast a while ago talking about music and the brain, and we focused on this idea of practice. She's a violist, and so she was coming at it from that point of view as well as linking it over to the singer. She mentioned that something she noticed a lot is students struggling with having an unrealistic progress bar for themselves. So throughout your research, what came up as the most common barriers? You mentioned circumstance there, so I just wondered if there was anything else around that or other parts to those barriers that make us kind of take a step away from practice.
In the research, so I researched a couple of different things that were kind of related. So my first big research project was about barriers, but it was about obstacles to warming up specifically rather than practice as a whole. And then it kind of extended into practice as well. And so a big part of the sort of obstacles to both really lack of knowledge, so not really knowing what the best thing was. But then a big one was space and not wanting to disturb people or feeling disturbed by other people. So it was like physical environment, lack of focus, lack of motivation, perceived lack of time. The idea of your progress bar thing and how that, I think that feeds into lack of knowledge, which you definitely talked about with Molly on that podcast, was, sometimes we just expect things, or like, I nailed it in the lesson once. Why can't I get it? And that's a knowledge thing. And the more that we're able to explain to students and to ourselves that things take longer than we want them to, that's a knowledge.
For Molly to manage this particular obstacle of having that unrealistic progress bar in her head, she mentioned how she would take notes and kind of log how long something was taking her to learn or how long it took to feel a bit more automated and the feelings that came along with that as well. So that when she started to learn a new piece of music, she could go, oh yeah, but a month is, I'm just still at the beginning or whatever. What options do singers have when they are experiencing practice barriers to whatever that might be, to parts of their warm up, to parts of their cool down, to parts of the training?
Yeah. And I think there's a few. I love that Molly, I mean, she sounds, I don't know her. She sounds like such a scientist though, doesn't she? I'm like, I'm writing down all the observations and I love that. And I think for some people that's brilliant because they have that. Some people they don't have that desire to be that kind of observation based. For me, I like journaling and that helps me. I think the key is self-awareness, but I think the tools can be different. My journey is kind of free flow. My brain dump is just blah, blah, blah. It's always a journey of self-discovery. So it's what is the best thing that I can do for me that helps me to do that thing? So yeah, let me ask you, what are ways for you to help yourself when you are struggling with certain barriers?
I will be quite regimented with writing down the amount of minutes that I have done something in order to feel productive so that downtime has freedom. If I know that I would really like to go and read a chapter of my book, but I have this whole host of things to do, whether that's to-do list or my own practice or lesson planning or whatever, that downtime does not feel restful if I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to get done. So I will write down, okay, I spent 15 minutes doing that thing. And then to see that written down on paper just makes me think, great, I was productive, I worked towards it, and I feel like I've achieved something. So that really works for me. So I've got my notebook always at my side and I will time log everything.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think there's an element of visual sort of in that, isn't there? And I think that sort of allows you to see not only how much time you've spent, but it's almost like a justification. I think sometimes I certainly find this, especially as like a busy self-employed freelancer, that practice can sometimes get pushed down because you feel like there are more important things to be doing. And so maybe, yeah, your way is sort of going, oh, but I'm allowed to practice this thing. I think that's really fascinating. I guess there's some other ways of sort of reminding people of things like that aren't written. So, going back to what you were saying about the progress bar and Molly, maybe having audio recordings. So students who want to get better at something and they don't feel like they're making the progress, having recordings where you can go, oh, but 2 weeks ago you sounded like this, a week ago you sounded like this, now you sound like this. For me, often it's about how it feels rather than how it sounds, and that's more difficult to to sort of capture. I guess you can do it on a video. That's where my journaling comes in. This felt really easy. This felt much more easy than it did last time. But yeah, I think as proven by what you've just said there, everybody's got different ways. And I think the job of the singing teacher is to really get to know the person in front of you and how they work. Because, their job is to work out how they work, but your job is to also work out how they work so that you can scaffold it and support it. So I wouldn't suggest certain things for somebody like yourself that work for me because you're not me and I'm not you. And I think that's a big thing that my research sort of helped me to work out as well. Because I very naively went into the whole of the master's program with this idea of like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And, my very, very first module that was unrelated to pretty much the rest of my research was like, I'm going to get to the bottom of vocal registration. I've always been confused about this and I'm going to get to the very bottom of it. And I realized very soon into that essay that was such a naive way of working. um, because that's just not the nature of these things. And so from then on, the things that I researched, I realized had so much more nuance. And I actually think that's one of the things I love about teaching is that there isn't a right answer and everybody's got different approaches that work for them and different ideas. And I love that. I love that variance in the human condition, if you like, and the fact that it challenges me as a teacher to be like, okay, here's the puzzle. We're going to find the answer for you specifically.
What are some of the other questions we could ask singers in order to get to know them enough to suggest things that might help to break those barriers or help them with motivation?
Yeah, it's going to sound like I'm really probing of my students, isn't it? But I'm not. I think I just pick up. So I often, if a student comes in, I ask them how they're doing, how they're feeling. Those kinds of questions, I think you can get a lot from. And just asking little questions about, did you enjoy that? How do you feel? I think oftentimes, especially when you first meet a singer, they have this idea of what they think you want them to say. I think that getting certain things down are very important. So warming up. But I don't talk about, well, I do talk about like what to do. But my first question is always, do you warm up? What does your warm up look like? Do you enjoy warming up? These kinds of questions, because what they'll say sometimes is, yeah, I do. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I like warming up. Oh, yeah, it's important. Or they won't be completely honest. And I think oftentimes I have to say to them, look, you can say that you don't because it can be really boring. You don't have to say that you do just because you think you should, because my job is to get to the bottom of why you don't so that we can make something that works for you that isn't like the perfect, most optimum, like this is the warm up. Because if your brain still thinks that's boring, you're still not going to do it, despite the fact that you know that it's brilliant. So my job is, I think, to help the students to find something that works for them. Because once you've got that little thing of like, yeah, I don't like warming up. Okay, well, could you, the first time you sing through your song, could you SOVT lip bubble it? Because that's doing something, but it doesn't feel like a super boring warm up. It feels more like the song, and that's the thing you want to do. Great. And then a few weeks later, maybe we could establish something else that feels a little bit more closer to what I need or what we want. That is my job as the singing teacher, is to help the student to discover themselves. And so those questions that you asked me, how would I do that? It's a lot of observation. It's a lot of asking questions and creating an environment where people feel like they can be honest, which I think is really important because I don't know about you. I've definitely been in circumstances with teachers, not just music teachers, like lots of teachers. There are some where you feel like you can absolutely be yourself. And there are some where you feel like you have to hold back on parts of who you are. And I think my goal is to always have an environment where a singer feels like they can be honest. Because if you don't have the full honesty, then you can't help them in the best way.
Can I just play devil's advocate a little bit? In terms of, for example, at the weekend, I needed to do my tax, and it's so dull and it's an abhorrent task. I hate it completely. There is nothing I can do to make that task fun. I might better put some jazz on in the background, which might soften the blow, but there's nothing I can do to make that enjoyable for me. The only thing maybe I've put in place is to have an accountant who does the other boring bit. Where does it draw the line in terms of helping a singer to find something and a way that they're going to engage with an activity that they don't necessarily find, thrilling, compared to, well, if you're going to be a professional, you're going to have to do these things, and sometimes they're going to be a bit boring, but you're just going to have to suck it up or whatever. What would you say on that?
I think that's a great example because who likes doing their taxes? Every musician I know, it's like it comes to January and we're all like, oh no, I should have done this months ago. And I think this is a little bit where that self-compassion bit comes in, right? Of saying it's okay that I hate this. It's okay that I do not find this enjoyable. It's also okay that after I've done this, I'm going to allow myself a massive hot chocolate with a big load of squirty cream on the top, that is my reward. Sometimes we need to go to places to get something done that maybe we wish we didn't need to. And that's where that sort of self-compassion comes from. I don't need to feel guilty that the reason that I did this was because I told myself I was going to get a prize at the end of it. I don't need to feel guilty that the only way that I get this done is because there's a deadline, because that external motivation is sometimes all we have when our internal motivation disappears. And I think, firstly, it's okay to acknowledge that. And it's okay to say, yeah, this thing I don't like. And then I guess this maybe falls down with the tax because, but it's certainly with the practice, we can keep our eyes on the bigger goal. So even with the tax, I guess the bigger goal is I'm doing this thing for my career. It is a necessary thing that won't take me that long once I buckle down and do it. I just have to scream my way through it and then reward myself at the end. I think that's okay. And the same with practice. If we focus on, okay, God, I really don't want to do this like really tiny, annoying bit of rhythm that is this tripping me up. But in the grand scheme of things, it's going to make this song feel so much better. And then that song is going to go into this set, and I'm going to have this set of music. And my ultimate goal is to be able to go out there and sing 2 sets of music and be paid for it. If we can hold the bigger ideals, sometimes that makes things worse, but sometimes that is just enough to create the motivation. But yeah, I think there's a whole different load of things that we can put in place to sort of help us, and none of them should make us feel guilty or ashamed or bad. And I think that's sometimes where things come in, is you have this little voice in your head going, but you're an adult. You shouldn't need to make yourself do that with a prize. Why not? Just do it. Like, don't feel the guilt. If it works, it works. And as I say, sometimes we need that external motivator.
What holes do you feel still need to be filled in the research on this topic? Was there something that you were like, it's just not enough about this particular part of it?
I'm sure there are, because research is vast and there are so many little sort of elements that you can go into. This may exist and I just didn't see it because it wasn't quite in the space that I was looking. But I would love for singing teachers to be trained in this more. I feel like in terms of practice, oftentimes in my experience, it's like, okay, go off and practice. And we don't necessarily know the best ways. And it's there are things there, but I don't know if it ever comes out of the academic world into the practitioner world. We've already talked about Molly, but some of that stuff she was saying about, knowing how the science of the brain and all that kind of stuff, like, I agree entirely. And I think that it would be useful to have those elements in the training for singing teachers. I guess the problem is that some singing teachers don't come through those routes. There are a lot of organizations, yourself included, that train singing teachers, but oftentimes teachers don't come through that. I mean, I didn't. And so I've been learning as I go, and some people are lucky enough to brush against that kind of learning, and sometimes they aren't. And I think there's the compassion part as well. I know that the majority of teachers are hugely compassionate with their students. However, I think there is still, it's even just like a nature of, like a comedy nature. And I play into it too. Oh, my singers didn't practice. But I think it would be really nice to like have something that helped us all, rather than just the singers don't practice, the teachers say they need to practice, and there's this fight. It would be nice for the research to fill that gap. I don't know how that's done, but I think it's important. I've had one viral video in my life on TikTok. That tune that went viral recently, the "Do you have any kids?" That one
Yeah.
that just never leaves my head now. But it was the singing teacher saying, well, did you do any practice? And the singer going, yes, I did. I sang through the song. And the teacher going, but did you actually practice properly. And I think the reason it went viral is because all the singers saw themselves in it and all the singing teachers saw themselves in it. And there is this disconnect between those two groups sometimes, where we all talk about practice, but what we understand to be practice is a wildly different thing. And I think it would be cool if there was some research that helped that.
So when we are looking at how we send a student away for the week, other than things like, what's your week looking like? What about these other days that you have? What time do you work best? Where do you feel you're flagging? How do we say, this is your practice, this is the focus, this is why, here you go?
How do we say that?
Yeah, but better than I just did it.
All right, there's a way of saying it. Yeah. I think it's interesting because it depends what we think of as practice, right? So as teachers, we often think of practice as being this like really focused, here's the thing that you're going to do, and you're going to do that, and you're going to do it enough times, getting it right, and then the next day you'll do the same thing. And I think because of that, sometimes even singers that I've spoken to about all of this for a while will still think, oh no, I don't have half an hour. So I can't practice because I don't have half an hour. And I'm like, but do you have 2 minutes? Yes, obviously there are certain technical things that we want our singers to be practicing. And those things are probably the things that we've done in the lesson. And we want them to be able to revisit them throughout the week. But I think if we expand our understanding or thought about what is practice, we can fit in a load more that is still fine. So I know we haven't really touched on it, but after my practice research module, the sort of next thing that I researched, which was actually assessment in higher education, which I'm a massive nerd on, and I won't even begin to speak about it because we'd be here for hours. But in that, it incorporated questions which were, what does a singer need to know to become a singer? Because that's what we should be assessing, right? And there are so many elements that are not technique that I think of as being things that we need to practice too. So the mindset, a positive mindset, the ability to pick out things that we did well, not just things that we want to work on. I think that's something. I think listening is something. I think we need to have lots of songs that we're going to learn. So listening to songs and writing down a list of songs that I might want to learn, thinking about what is it about that song that makes me want to learn it? Why do I love that song? Is it the lyric? Is it the feel of it? Is it the fact that it's got this chromatic rising bass line and syncopated rhythm, which is always a killer for me? I'm like, anything with that. I just love it. And so when we expand what we think of as practice, we find that we can do it all the time. We find listening to a podcast, well, that can be practice because it's making me think about the way that whatever the podcast is talking about, the way that I, create my sound or whatever it is. I can be listening to an interview of my favorite artist and they mention somebody that they love. Well, I can go off and research, well, who was that singer that they mentioned? Oh, listen to their stuff. Oh, that's great. And that can send you off on a whole listening journey. It's not practice with the voice, but it is practicing becoming a singer, or rather it is practice to help you to become a singer. And I think that's important too. So when someone's saying, well, I've got 8 till 8, I'm like, yeah, you do. But you could listen to some new music in your lunch break instead of something that you've always listened to all the time. Or, when you're giving yourself a 10-minute scroll break, you could use an app that's a listening app or a sight singing app instead. Still gamified, still kind of mindless Duolingo for for sight singing. You don't have to, because there's also, we don't want to like shove productivity into every space. We want to still keep the love. We need to take breaks. We need, to have times where we feel like we're allowed to just be ourselves and not have this stuff. But one of the things that I found really fascinating, I've been to a Jacob Collier Q&A, and I've watched a few of his question and answers online as well. And one of the questions that came up was, how did you how did you make yourself practice all of these different instruments? How did you find the time to practice all these instruments? And his answer was, well, I don't really think I practiced. I just was curious. And he often had these like little kind of puzzles that he was trying to work out on whatever instrument he was playing. Oh, can I do that? It was all curiosity and play led, basically. I mean, nobody could say that that man has not practiced, like, because he's phenomenal. But if he doesn't think of it as practice, then there's a weird disconnect. I think oftentimes the word practice makes us think, ugh, I don't want to practice. Oh, I've got to practice. I certainly did. That's why none of my piano scales, even to this day, are good. Because I'm like, oh, practice. But if we don't think of it as practice and we think of it as, I don't know, something else, or we try and frame practice as being something that's more expansive and more fun and playful, then I think that actually eliminates some of the obstacles that we have, because you can always find time to do things that you like to do. Almost. Yeah, I say that generally. Almost across the board. This is a weird analogy, but I always think of, like if you meet someone and you're like, oh, I just don't have time for a boyfriend right now. I just don't have time for a girlfriend right now. But if you meet the person and you're like, oh yeah, really, like you're gonna make the time. And so, and I think of it like that. I think if you can find things that work for you to maintain. So maybe, yeah, maybe it's not the focus practice that the teacher wants, that ideally you want, but you do have 20 minutes in a practice room with your mate and you're singing along, or you've joined a choir, or, all of these more informal ways of learning can like change how we practice massively, can change our output. Just because we don't have 20 minutes where we can sit at a piano and make weird vowel noises doesn't mean that we can't practice.
If you've been thinking about joining the BAST community through one of our courses, but you just don't know which option is the best for you, then why not book your free Zoom chat with our very own Kimberly George, who has all the answers. Head over to basttraining.com/book-a-call/ and click that big blue button. That's basttraining.com/book-a-call/. Now, where were we?
I think there's also something to consider as teachers about how we think about how we give practice, because we could sit behind our pianos and think, well, I'm not a very good teacher if I'm not giving practice every single lesson, or I have to give them something to show that they're developing, or if I don't give them a practice focus, then I'm doing them a disservice and they're not gonna. So it's also taking on that reframe for us as well. I mean, I know one time I did say to a student, I can see that your battery is low. You've said your happy chips are not particularly high. Your focus this week is, or for the next day or two, is to do self-care, is to go and do a couple of your favorite things, or even saying to someone, you may benefit from expanding your musical theatre knowledge. I've got a whole list of like DVDs that you can borrow. Watch one of those as your practice. So there are variabilities, but I think as a teacher, you do sometimes get into a bit of a rut, thinking, no, I have to give a scalic focus for this week, otherwise I'm bad.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, is that oftentimes our expectation, the singer's expectation is, oh, practice is this, and this. But that often comes from our expectation, because that was our expectation when we were students. And we're often teaching in the way that we were taught. And I think sometimes the systems that we're in expect those things too. So yeah, if I want my singers to learn scales because the test says that they need to learn scales, well, I try and suggest ways where I'm like, okay, I clearly don't want you to sit at a piano and play this scale over and over and over for 20 minutes, because that's going to be really boring. But where are places that you visit every day where you could just run it in your head? So this is a ridiculous Tessa joke, but if you're like learning the Phrygian scale, you put a post-it on your fridge and it says Phrygian. And when every time you go, you just have a little hum. And if you're like, oh, nope, it's not in there, well, then you know what to do next time you're at a piano, or you have a track. But we didn't think of it like that when we were students. So it takes a little bit more time. And the same with like technique stuff. So if we're like working on a bit and it's a high mixed belt and they're really trying to modulate the vowels or whatever it is and put a cry in or whatever, well, let's instead say, all I want you to do this week is that phrase, but I want you to try it in these three different emotions and just record them or note down how they feel. Just make some sort of record. So first I'm going to sing it like I'm super enthusiastically excited about something. Then I'm going to sing it like I'm frustrated, and then I'm going to sing it like I'm embarrassed, or whatever the emotions are. And you could give one where you're like, I don't think that will give what I'm looking for. And then you'll give two where you're like, either of these could work. I'll see which one helps them. Now that's kind of thinking outside the box a little bit. It's bringing in some play, some curiosity. It's not saying, I want you to do this with this vowel and da 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 da. It's saying, I'm going to give you 3 tools. You come back and tell me which one you like the best. And it's more fun because it's a game. And regardless of how old you are, we all love a game. And so I think it's better to have options like those where you could say, oh, you could do this, or could you do this, or you could do this, than just say, this is what I want. And then when they inevitably come back and say, I didn't manage to do as much as I wanted to, getting frustrated or annoyed. I always come back to this one lesson that I had when I was at university where I got set a song and I didn't like the song. And so I didn't learn the song. And I'm a pretty good sight reader and my ears are pretty good. So I was like, I'll get away with it. It's fine. Didn't learn the song. Most definitely did other musical things that week. Can't tell you what they were, but most definitely did other things. And I came back to that lesson and we sang through the song and I clearly busked it. And the singing teacher clearly knew. And instead of asking me any of those questions, why didn't you do it? Or what did you do instead? Or any of those things, just laid into me and told me they didn't know why I was there. You know, I clearly didn't want to be on the course. And maybe at the time, because I was a nervous first year, I wasn't honest. Maybe that environment didn't feel set up in that way yet. Certainly with hindsight, I'm like, that wasn't okay. They didn't ask me anything. They didn't ask me why. I just didn't like the song. It was as simple as that. I didn't like the song, so I didn't learn it. And yeah, now I'd have to learn songs I don't like all the time. And I've learned a way to do that. But like, I just think I don't ever want to be that teacher who makes assumptions, who was a fine teacher otherwise, but didn't ask the right questions and just assumed that the person who'd come to the lesson, like if I didn't want to be there, I wouldn't have been at the lesson, would I? I'd come to the lesson knowing that I hadn't done the work. I think as a teacher now, I'm like, there's something interesting in that. Why did you come to the lesson without doing the work? You clearly want to be here, so something else is going on. It's my job to uncover it and work out a way to help you.
It's interesting. And I think, you know, there's definitely been times where I haven't been equipped with what to ask. And it's been a case of just looking at the My Music Staff app and going, but you didn't log on, but you've just said you've practiced. So either you're frightened to say that you haven't because you know maybe you should have done something but couldn't. If we look at the work of Becky Gillespie and she talks about singing for the self-conscious, it's so not that black and white that when someone doesn't practice, it's because they're lazy or because they can't be bothered, or sometimes it might be those things, but more often than not, it's probably maybe they're just worried about getting it wrong, or maybe they're really struggling with something else going on in their life and that song reminds them of that, or it could be so many different things. So I've definitely grown in that area. There's that old saying, isn't there? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But, well, maybe we need to investigate why the horse isn't thirsty.
Yeah, brilliant. I totally agree. And I think one of the most important things within a singing lesson, the relationship between the singer and the singing teacher, because in a singing lesson, so many things can happen or not happen. Like I've had singing lessons that have been incredibly productive, but there's been no singing. So it's not really about the singing necessarily. It's about the relationship between the two people and how one can sort of guide the other. But there's not, in my opinion, there's not a this person knows everything and this person has come to learn it. You're learning from each other. And I think that's what my ADHD brain really enjoys about the job of being a singing teacher, is that it's always a puzzle and it's always a little like thing to sort of explore and try and work out, okay, that's not working. I've had singing students where, prior, if I'd have had this singer 10, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have known what to do with them. But now I sit and I go, okay, so if I ask her to do that, she's not going to want to. She's not going to do it because she doesn't feel comfortable. So how can I bring her to the same place in a way that she does feel comfortable? That's my job. And sometimes it's hard. And sometimes I'm like, I don't want that job. But that's my job because I need to help her be the singer that she wants to be. And I know that this will help, but I have to sort of bring it in a different way.
I do feel like from this conversation, I really do think this brings up how we look at the expectation of the teacher in terms of you are still doing a really good lesson if you have talked for half of it, if that is what that student needs, or you have spent the whole lesson looking at rep and they haven't sung a note. Well, that's still really great work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well. The only thing though I'd add to that is provided it's what the student needs, because we've all been in lessons where the teachers like decided to show off and tell us and we're like, no, I want to sing. I have students who they want to mine me for my knowledge, for my expertise, and whether that's, in a what should I sing here, or what registration should I use, or blah blah blah, blah, or whether it's, oh, I had this gig and I've been asked to quote for this gig. I don't know how much money to ask for. And we can have a discussion about that. My view is that I'm here to help you be the best singer that you can be. And that, like, that's my only role. And I've had students who, yeah, I absolutely will do the drills in the lesson. And that's because that's what they need. I had a student once who I loved working with, and they would ask all the questions. I would do the demonstrating. They would ask all the questions, but they didn't want to do it wrong, in inverted commas, in front of me. Or so they would go away, and then the next time I'd see them, they'd sing what they were working on, and I was like, "You've been working on that, haven't you?" Yeah, I have, because they wanted that space to do it by themselves. And if I'd have forced, I was going to say, if I'd have forced them to do it in the lesson, it wouldn't have been good for anyone. One of the really interesting things, and it's why I work in higher education now more than anywhere else. I used to work in schools, from littles all the way up to sixth form. And then I moved into university teaching. And one of the big things that I had to get my head around in the first instance was I have less control here. What I mean by that is when you're in a school or when you're working with younger kids, it's the singing teacher's sort of job position to be able to say, yes, that person is ready for that concert. Yes, I think this person should sing that concert. Yes, I think you're ready to go into your exam. And you have a lot of power to decide whether somebody is ready for something. One of the things that I initially really struggled with going into higher education was they've got this assessment regardless. Like, that's terrifying because I no longer get to say whether I think they're ready for it. It's coming. And so I had to change the way that I thought of myself and my role. My role was no longer like, I have to get you ready, because inevitably not every student is going to be as good as you think or know that they could be. For various different reasons. There's a whole load of stuff going on. So my role then became, I am here. I'm like a piece of equipment or a PT in a gym. If you want to come and use me, I will give you everything I possibly can. If you're not going to engage, I can't be blamed. It's like, you join a gym membership, but if you don't go to any classes and you don't ever go to the gym, it's not the gym's fault that you didn't hit your goals. And I think that way of working initially felt quite callous. But now I actually think of it as being like, no, I can offer you a lot and I can offer you exactly what you want and sometimes what you need that you don't think you want. Like, just being basically, we're talking about being student-centered here. Like, that doesn't mean that I don't get to say, no, actually, you really need to do this. It's not that the student runs everything. I still have the expertise. I'm still the mentor. I still get to shape things sometimes. But it's much more kind of, okay, well, what do you think you need? Cool. This is what I think you need. Let's work together over the course of this year to get you to this specific goal, which is an assessment, but really beyond that. Because I don't want to be just teaching to an assessment. I want to be teaching to a career. And then we've got this thing that's like a little marker in the grand scheme of things. As a singing teacher, yeah, we can think of our roles when appropriate as being more expansive than the singer's brought a song and they want help with this specific technique.
Yeah.
I mean, some singing teachers are that, and that's fine. There's definitely a role for that. And there's some people I know that are like more kind of artistic coaches, and that's fine too. But I think within my role as a higher education singing teacher, practitioner, whatever you want to call me, I think it would be a shame not to be able to help the students in everything that I know they'll need.
I don't know what you think about this. I kind of put together, and it's actually really annoying that there's a crease in it. So I'm just going to breathe through that one. So I made a little vocal progression tracker because I felt that when I was asking students, what are your strengths, which no one can ever answer, and what are your challenges, which they come at you with everything, is actually the nuances of what those things mean. And I know that we spoke before this, you don't necessarily think about things all separately, like articulation and things I call as one sort of separate entity. And I just wanted to get an idea from the student about where they feel their understanding and their development was. And so I put together a little sheet, which for our, oh, hold on, let me move it back there. There you go, I could cover my face. For audio listeners, I'm just holding up, I think it's 8 different battery pictures of different things: warm up, cool down, transition, breathing, registration. And I just asked the singer to colour in where they think they are in terms of efficiency and effectiveness in those areas of their voice. And it's also kind of a mindful task with the colouring in, and it's a reflective task. And then they're bringing it back into me, and I'm going, okay, are we on the same page in what I'm hearing and they're feeling and they're assessing? Do I feel their awareness is fully up to what I think I'm hearing that they need to be aware of? And it was really interesting because people were like, yeah, I warm up and I cool down, but somebody came in and didn't colour in the whole battery and warm up and cool down. And the singer said, I don't think I'm that sure on how to cool down. But if I hadn't have given her the battery tracker sheet, I may have missed it. So that was really insightful. I wonder what you would think of that.
I mean, I'm a big fan of worksheets in general.
Oh,
and
yay, good.
I make a lot of worksheets. We don't necessarily, because some students don't like them, but I think they're always available. And I think that's a great idea to try and get everybody on the same page, as it were. So knowing how they feel and then matching that to your thoughts. I think that's great. I think that's really cool. I often ask students, so the very first lessons, I often ask them, what they think their strengths are, what they think their challenge areas are. I don't know if you find this. I often get, oh yeah, breathing, breath. I need to work on my breath. I'm like, do you? And so again, sometimes it's what they think that you want to hear, and you've got to kind of navigate that.
I also thought, because then if they've coloured it in one particular colour, it's another way to sort of bring in progress as well, because if they choose another colour and they're doing it, they can physically see or tangibly see something moving along.
Yeah. And I think that thing of progress is really important to mark. It's kind of what we were talking about at the very beginning as well, with that kind of progress bar thing. Because singing is not a like, and now I'm done kind of a thing. And so and because it's cyclical, it could be frustrating. I made a tracker for some scales. So the assessment at the university, one of the universities that I work at, has changed. I've been there about 11 years. And when I first came in, it was incredibly prescriptive. And it took me a while to get my head around it. And I was like, And as I've gone through and I've become more confident as somebody who feels able to speak up in like, a circumstance with lots of academics, I've sort of changed things and they've given me a lot of ability to make my own decisions. So instead of being like, right, you have to sing me the major pentatonic scale 5 times, moving up a semitone each time, I was like, here's what I'm going to do. And I made a tracker sheet with all the different scales. Some of them nobody's ever going to get to, right? Not all the different scales. That's a lot of scales. But you know what I mean? Quite a lot of scales. And they've got like, can recognize, can sing back if played, can sing unaided. And then there's can improvise with or write in. And so it's a case of now, where's the progress? And you date that. So you go, okay, when I'm sure that if I heard the major pentatonic scale, I could tell you that's a major pentatonic scale, then I will date that. And then when it comes to the assessment now, I ask them to give me that sheet because I'm not going to ask them to sing it unaided 5 times semitone up each time if they can only sing it back when I've sung it to them. But if they said that, then great, I'll sing it to them and they can tell me what it is and they can sing it back. And I think that progress, and now we use those, and we can use that whether or not we've got a test or not. And I think sometimes just being able to, so your idea of using different colors and being like, well, on this date I felt like this, but now I feel like this, that going back to what Molly was saying in her podcast, was now that gives us a knowledge, especially if we date it, it gives us a knowledge of how long it took for that thing, which means that we can now better predict how long it's going to take me for the next one so that I can set my expectations better.
Along the way, has there been any standout resources that you came across with researching this type of thing for your MA?
Yes and no. I think I found lots of things where I've gone, yeah, that's great. But if it doesn't work for the student in front of me, then it's not that great. Yeah, there are things that I read where I was like, oh, wow, that was brilliant. But I know that I can't ask a student to read it because it's an academic paper. And even I struggle to keep my eyes open for academic papers sometimes. You just scan the first bit and the last bit. And then if you go, oh, yeah, actually, I want to read the middle. So I don't know if I could say anything specific just for that reason, that like it maybe worked for me, but not for others. But I think what I will say is there are a lot of people out there, academics and practitioners in the quote unquote real world, who are creating brilliant resources and are talking about this stuff. It's just whether you can find them.
Can you tell us about your practice hub and the podcast that you have very recently put together and published?
Yes. So I'll start with the practice hub, but they do kind of go hand in hand for me. So as I said, my research sort of fell through from warming up to practice to then assessment via what is it that we need to know as singers. And I wanted to create a space that had options for practice that could help. So if you were like, oh, I don't know what to practice, I don't have any time, you could go on there and find something. And I didn't want it. I mean, there are lots of brilliant, practice tracks out there. And actually, before I started the masters, I got a little bit of a hyperfixation on them. So I have quite a lot, like Cheryl Porter and Kim Chander and all of these people and make some great tracks, and I'd like collect them. And I think they're brilliant, but sometimes they're like, but what do I do with them? And sometimes I forget that they exist, and I've got them on my computer and I just don't use them. And so I wanted to create somewhere where I could put all of these things. And so I have options for voiceless practice, so like what we've talked about, different ways to practice that are I don't have time to do technique, or I can't be loud today because my neighbors are sleeping, or whatever it is. So there's sort of options for those, and what I call singing snacks, which I sort of started talking about on my social media, which I think of as being a very sort of quick and easy thing to do in a minute or so that gives you something. The problem that I have with some of those tracks that I talked about, especially the ones where you're just copying somebody online, is that if they're technique based in particular, it's really hard. You need that feedback loop from your singer to know that they're doing something efficiently or sustainably. I've done things before. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing that properly. And then it turns out I've not been doing it properly. So one of the focuses that I've always had is, what can I do that is applicable to as many students as possible? And that's why I'm going around in circles, but that's why my research was warming up, practice, and assessment, because those are the only things that every single one of my students could relate to, because they all, speak different languages and have different wants and needs in terms of their vocal technique and even their genres that they're in. Popular music is such a vast. I've got some people who want to do musical theatre, and some people who want to do jazz, and some people who are R&B. So I was like, oh, I can't do any of that. I can only do things that they absolutely all have in common. Well, they all need to warm up and look after their voices. They all need to practice to get better, and they're all going to take this assessment. That was basically why I did the research that I did. And so I take that into these singing snacks. Is like, okay, well, I don't want to give anyone anything that's like, what was that viral one? Raise your yas, because that will work for some people and they'll be like, I found the magic cure. But for some people, it'll hurt. And for some people, it'll flip and it won't work. And so I tend to steer clear of that stuff until you're in a one-to-one lesson with me. So I do things that are more music theory kind of based. So scale patterns that are trickier, that use your brain, or a little idea that, you could do it silently, therefore it's not going to cause any mischief. Things like presentation, performance stuff. So that's sort of the angle for the singing snacks. Take this pattern that you already do, but let's make it minor, or let's change it to engage the brain a little bit more and to add a little bit of musicality and theory. Not because I think everybody needs to know music theory, but just because it's an option. And I think for me, the way I use music theory is just to help me to understand why something's hard, to give me compassion for myself, to be like, why can I not hit that note? Oh, well, because it's a flat 9 and that's really hard. Like that's how I use music theory in lessons. So within the hub, there's the snacks, there's voiceless options, there's also mindset things. So we were talking about something that's mindful. I've made coloring pages with quotes on that you can just sit. And is it practice? Well, kind of, yeah, because you need to take a break. Sometimes it's nice to have the mental space, and you're reading something that's like a nice affirming thing. So it's got that in, and then it's got song studies, like things that are beyond singing. So talking about how to create a set list, how to rehearse with a band, how to, all of these things that as singers, as working singers and as teachers, oftentimes we take for granted. I have a student who's like, well, how do you know which song to start with? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've got that information. I can tell you lots of things about it. But we don't realize how much we know because we've just come to sort of, it just gets absorbed. So that's all in there as well, because I think it's important. So that's the hub. It's got loads of different elements, and alongside it, I decided to do a podcast. I've wanted to do a podcast for ages. In fact, all of these things have just been like floating in the ether, and I was like, right, this is the year. I'm finally going to create something to put them all in. I've had like coloring sheets on my like ideas board for ages. I didn't know how it fit in until I'd created this hub. And the podcast is basically the question is, what do I wish I'd learned earlier? And I just talk about that. And the episodes are really short. So the first one, I think we're only up to episode 4 at this point. So the first one is warming up, but it's warming up with the angle on what makes you not want to warm up, and how can we do that. And within the hub, I've got different options for warming up, but they're like, oh, I can't be bothered, or I just want to sing the song. So it's those kinds of things rather than, well, you're going to do a 1.5 scale 6 times and then you're going to do some whatever it is. And then the second one was about choosing the key for the song. How do you know that you've chosen the right key? The third one coincided with the beginning of the higher education term. So that was 10 things that I wish I'd known before I went to university, kind of thing. And then the next one is cool downs, because again, that was something that I just hadn't until relatively recently. Nobody had even mentioned it. I don't think it was a thing when I was doing my singing lessons. It was like, right, you're done, bye-bye. But I try and make it friendly and accessible, and it links nicely to some of the things that I'm talking about within the hub. And actually, if I might, so I've been at the end of every episode asking people to write in and say, what is something that you wish you'd known sooner, so that maybe I can make a podcast about that. So if I can, Alexa, what's something that you came to later, and when you found it, you're like, oh, I wish I'd known that sooner? With regards to singing, let me just be specific.
The two that come to mind straight away, I wish I'd known earlier in my own training how the voice worked, because I feel like I should have, or I could have been in a position to make more efficient choices vocally if I just knew certain things about the science side of it. And the second one was, I wish I knew how to pick my repertoire better. I wanted to just have a little bit more understanding, knowledge of all of the different styles that came under musical theatre particularly. I mean, I took a song that I would now be like, don't take that to a drama school because it's not in my EDI. I wouldn't at all be doing that these days. But I fine, I could have maybe thought about that more deeply myself, 20 odd years ago. But I wasn't advised either. So I think those things.
Yeah. And I think the tricky thing about it is that I often think about this. It's like, it's the hindsight is so helpful in that respect, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And so even now, and this is one of the things that I shouldn't, but I do lament sometimes. I'm like, why do I want to talk about practice so much? Because only the people who practice know what practice is. Like, it's really hard to sort of tell people this is what you need, because they don't know what they don't want what they need. They want what they want. And if somebody had come to me with that knowledge, was I ready to learn it at that point? Some of it, yes. Some of it, no, I wasn't ready.
But I guess then when they are ready, it's there. And you can be like, I've
Yeah.
been here for a long time.
I know. And I think that is some of the point now, is that I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to make it. I'm going to make it because I know that it's beneficial, and I know that it's something that I wish that I'd had. And for when people are ready, they can come. And yeah, is it weird to have a practice hub that has like a little journal prompt in it? Maybe, because it's not just an exercise library, which is often what you find. But I think it's important because that journal prompt might be the thing that makes you realize why you're avoiding the certain thing. And just having that moment of clarity can be like, oh, okay, so now I can do this. And then, and within the hub, you can book a session with me and we can talk about that together, and we can do the things that the hub doesn't touch on as much, because I think it's really important not to do anything that is unsustainable for your voice. So I don't want to be like, right, this exercise is for your mixed belt until I can hear how you create your mixed belt. And if it's squeezing or if it's not, I want to make sure that you're doing things that aren't going to cause you damage. And I think that, as a singing teacher, we've talked about what our role is. I think our role is also, there's a duty of care there. And I think if I just create something and be like, there you go, for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable not knowing. So I'm trying my best to sort of create this space where there's things that you can do where you're like, oh, I've got 5 minutes. What do I do? And you just go on there and you find something. But also, if you're like, okay, this is the thing that I want to work on. I've done the journaling. I know what my goal is. This is what I want. where do I start? Then we can have a session, and then you go off, because that's the ultimate aim, isn't it? As a singing teacher, is especially a singing teacher in higher education, where we're training professionals for a career. Is like I want them to be independent. I want them to know how to know what's good and what's not. What they want to keep working on, what they don't. I don't want them to be like, oh, Tessa, can you tell me this? Like I'm it's kind of parenting in that way, isn't it? Like you sort of you teach them the things so that they could go off and do it themselves.
That's something I have found recently. I've been saying to some students, how do you warm up? What is your warm up consisting of? And sometimes they say, I just press play and I do it. And I'm like, actually, that's great, because you can just do it. But what are the components of that? Because if you find you need variability or something stops working for you, what can you replace it with? So I've been a bit of a one going, no, but can you actually break down what's in that warm up a bit, so that you can find all these other nuances and actually know what it means to warm up?
No, I think that's great though. And to hark back to that technical test that I sort of inherited that was really specific. Now, one of the first things is like, how do you warm up? And then sort of diving for more information, and then being like, okay, if you were feeling this way, what would you do? Because it's that, isn't it? It's giving knowledge and understanding, and because nothing's ever the same. Like there's always so many variables that as a singer and as a teacher, we need lots of different tools to get us to the same place, because one day that first tool isn't going to work for whatever reason. And so our jobs are to just gain more and more and more, just in case
for a rainy day.
I think that's a great way of training. Well done.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you, Tessa. It's been so lovely to chat with you. Where can our listeners find out more about you, follow your podcast, have a listen, sign up to the Practice Hub?
Yes, do all those things. So everything is linked on tessasmith.com. So you can find that. But then there's also the singersguide.com will take you more into everything, as will the Singers Practice Hub, because I just like domain names, apparently.
Tessa, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been so lovely. Thanks, Alexa. I listen to this podcast a lot, and I have always wanted to be on it. So thank you for inviting me.